The Templars, in short, are a religious monastic military order formed about 1,000 years ago. During their golden age, they amassed unimaginable wealth, probably laying the foundations for the world's first international banking system. Of course, the higher you climb, the higher and more painfully you fall. An equally dramatic decline accompanied the Templars' meteoric rise. Almost a millennium has passed since their dissolution, but conspiracy theories persist to this day that they never completely disappeared. Many believe that the remnants of this mysterious order continue to pull the strings of our society behind the scenes in modern times. So what actually happened to the Templars? And why do we continue to talk about them today? The story of the Knights Templar begins during the time of the Crusades. In 1095, Pope Urban II called on the European Christian knights to stop fighting each other and take back the Holy Land from the Muslims. His rallying call led to the capture of Jerusalem by the Fatimid Caliphate in 1099. After Jerusalem suddenly came under Christian control, Christian pilgrims from all over Europe began flocking to the Holy Land to visit the many holy sites there. But there was one problem. The road to Jerusalem was littered with dangers. Robbers prowled the dusty roads, and pilgrims were easy targets. Thousands were robbed, some even killed. At this point, it became clear that something had to be done. Desperate times call for desperate knights. We're not sure that's exactly how the expression goes, but you get the idea. But anyway, more importantly, a French knight named Hugues de Payens decided to stand up and become the hero the Holy Land desperately needed. In 1119, he gathered 8 of his knightly companions and, with the blessing of King Baldwin II of Jerusalem, formed a new monastic order whose main purpose was to protect Christian pilgrims during their travels in the Holy Land. This order would later become known as the Order of the Templars. The Templars get their name from their headquarters located on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. This is where the Temple of Solomon stood from about 970 BC until its destruction in 587 BC by King Nebuchadnezzar. But one thing plagued the Templars. They were extremely poor. So great was their poverty that they relied on the charity of those they protected. However, the Knights of the Order performed their task of protection extremely well, and soon the dark cloud of poverty began to crack. People began to donate money, and others bequeathed land or valuables to the Templars as their reputation in Christendom grew. Even the Pope granted them a large monetary donation and exempted them from paying taxes. And that's not all. The Templars answered only to the Pope, which contributed enormously to the success of the order, but also became one of the reasons for its demise. More on this later. At its peak, the Knights Templar had about 20,000 members who were scattered across almost all of Europe and the Middle East, fighting against infidels and protecting pilgrims. But it was all about to go wrong. The first signs of the coming crisis began to appear when Muslims systematically began to reclaim territory in the Holy Land and make treaties for the safe passage of Christian pilgrims. Thus, the Templars began to lose the main reason for their presence there. When the Muslims captured Acre in 1291, the Holy Land Crusades were effectively over, thus beginning the final stage of Templar history. Without pilgrims to protect in the Holy Land, the Templars largely withdrew from military affairs. Remember we mentioned a while back that the Pope granted them a large monetary donation and exempted them from paying taxes. It was this act that gave a serious boost to the financial success of the order. To put it bluntly, the organization became so rich that it hardly knew what to do with all the money it had. The Templars built hundreds of castles and cathedrals, many of which can still be seen today. They also bought a large fleet of ships and, most impressively, the entire island of Cyprus. Having abandoned military activity, they turned to finance, property management, trading, banking, and overseeing their tax-free estates throughout Europe. They thus became the wealthiest organization of the Middle Ages, which essentially made them the Bank of Europe. But let us explain in more detail. That way you will understand for yourself why the Templars are probably still pulling the strings of some of the most important processes in the world and how they got there. After the fall of Acre, they created a branching network of commanderies or preceptories scattered throughout Europe. Each of these, shall we call them offices, was tax-free and served as both grain storage, valuables, refuge, and, most importantly, financial operations. The Templars quickly learned that moving money safely in the then dangerous world was not just a necessary, but a profitable business. They set up a system of letters of credit and receipts that allowed pilgrims to deposit money in one place and withdraw it from another, what might safely be called an early version of a bank transfer. In this way, the Templars eliminated the risk of muggings on the roads and made it easier for pilgrims and merchants while accumulating fees and interest. This efficient method increased their revenue immensely. In addition, they also turned to lending to kings and nobles who often needed resources for wars, palace expenses, or expanding their holdings. This made the Templars key figures in financing political ventures and conflicts in Europe, and their influence became enormous. But as every rose has its thorns, so every success breeds enemies, and the Templars were not without them. Among all their ill-wishers, one stands out the most: Philip IV, King of France, also known in history as Philip the Handsome. In fact, the Handsome One borrowed a lot of money from the Templars to finance his military campaigns. When we say a lot, we mean an outrageous amount. Not surprisingly, of course, he couldn't pay it back, so he came up with a diabolical plan. He forced the weak-willed Pope Clement V to ally with him against the Templars. The French king accused the order of having lost the Holy Land and not meeting his own high standards. Now that the Pope was on his side, Philip had a powerful tool to attack the Templars. Remember, we said earlier that the military order was answerable only to the Pope. What does that mean? Very simply, whoever has the Pope's bias controls the order. Oh, and lest we fail to mention, Pope Clement V lived in France, in Avignon, instead of Rome. Need we say more? We assume you get the idea by now. So, in order to destroy the Templars, the king took advantage of the mystery surrounding the order's arcane practices. He accused them of black magic, sodomy, desecration of the cross, and the Eucharist. If this sounds absurd to you, the reason is that it actually is just that. But Philip the Beautiful didn't think so. He orchestrated a mass arrest of the Templars, and overnight, including the Grand Master of the Order, Jacques de Molay, on Friday, October 13th, 1307. Some argue that this is the basis for the dreaded Friday the 13th and the notion of 13 as a fatal number. Over the next 4 years, however, almost all the Templars were acquitted in trials held throughout Europe, except those in France who were not so fortunate. There, after severe torture, some Templars confessed to spitting on the cross or to denying Jesus during secret rites. Later, many of them retracted these confessions, saying they had been tortured under threat of death and torture. But it was too late. The stain had been cast. Hundreds, perhaps even thousands of Templars were killed for their alleged crimes, including Jacques de Molay, whom King Philip burned at the stake on a small island in the middle of the Seine River in Paris. It is said that while the flames were eating him alive, the Grand Master uttered a curse, declaring that within a year he would meet Pope Clement and King Philip before God, and indeed, both Pope and King died soon after. But this was of no consequence to the Templars, for by that time, the order had already been dissolved. And here ends the story of the military order of the Knights Templar. Or does it? Actually, because of their secrecy and influence, the Knights Templar never died. Multiple conspiracy theories claim that they never completely disappeared. One of them states that the surviving Templars went to Portugal, and from there sailed across the Atlantic to the Americas, thanks to their mighty merchant fleet. But this is not quite accurate. While various kings across Europe arrested Templars en masse at the Pope's behest, one king, Denis the Fon of Portugal, refused to do so. Instead, he founded the Military Order of Christ and invited all surviving former Templars to join him. The group still exists today, more than 700 years later. So, yes, they migrated to Portugal, but did they migrate to the New World? Most likely not, because the ships of the Middle Ages that were capable of traversing such vast distances existed for a very short time. Richard the Lionheart, for example, had an impressive fleet with which he transported his troops to the Middle East and North Africa, but after only a few years that fleet no longer existed. Furthermore, there is no evidence of a mass medieval exodus of young elite soldiers. Yet the idea that the Templars simply disappeared remains inexplicable to many. For example, according to one version of the survival theory, Western Scotland became a haven for escaped Templars. Here again, however, there is a lack of any evidence to support this claim. Moreover, The paradox is that the west coast of Scotland is one of the few places in Britain where the Templars had no significant assets. Nevertheless, an attempt is made to weave the myth of an elite Templar army into the story of the Battle of Bannockburn, which was fought in 1314 between the armies of Robert the Bruce, King of Scotland, and King Edward II of England. Proponents of the theory hint that Robert the Bruce owed his victory over the English to a detachment of elite warriors hiding in northern Britain. Despite the many chronicles written at the time, none of them mention this Templar army. And before you ask, no, the Freemasons did not evolve from the Templars. The social fraternity known as Freemasonry originated with the craft stonemasons in England, Scotland, and Ireland. Did surviving Templars infiltrate the Freemasons? That is now a separate question. Perhaps the most fascinating theory is that the Templars possessed the Holy Grail and the Ark of the Covenant. Things get even more serious, as some accounts say they are also linked to the removal of President Kennedy and even the resignation of Pope Benedict XVI in 2013. In fact, the history of the Knights Templar is so mysterious that to us commoners, it is like a blank piece of paper on which we can write whatever we want. On the other hand, we have to ask ourselves to what extent it is possible for an organization with such a powerful structure, finances, and influence to simply evaporate. So the Templars were something like the banking system of Europe. Is it possible that they have quickly learned from what happened and gone into deep shadow? In the end, it is unlikely we will ever know the truth of what happened, or perhaps is still happening. However, you can continue to explore the influences and stories of the hidden organizations by watching our video on secret societies, the dark puppeteers of our destiny, which you see to the left.